Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform, and real pleasure to have two esteemed analysts, John Reed and Pete Tiliakos. Repeat guests. I've had them several times. They never seem to get tired of me. They always have a new angle to things. And today's theme is the fall events calendar. I mean, these two guys I've been to a few, but these guys have completely outstripped my frequent flyer catalog. So, John, welcome. Tell me about your travel schedule. Go into excruciating detail, and then talk a little bit about, what have you seen? Some common themes, or what has excited you? What has made you go, God, I wish I didn't come to this event. Nothing new. And then you can follow John.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Well, I'm going to spare everyone the details of the tarmac experiences. But in the end,
that's be the only exciting thing you talk about today.
In the end, the question becomes, is it worth it? And the answer is yes, but probably not for the reasons vendors would like. I think vendors really want their shows to be about keynotes and branding and entertainment. And to a large extent, I think what is really meaningful right now for both for me, but also I think for customers, is those priceless opportunities to have frank, informal, peer-based interactions and really get down to the problems that we're facing. And if I could characterize pre and post-pandemic events in one word, it would be that problem-solving mentality. That when you run into people at events now, they're trying to bring stuff back to their teams to solve problems at home. So yeah, they might want to have a little bit of fun, but it's not the old escapist fare. And so I'm also kind of looking at where are the gaps between the vendor speak and what customers care about. And we'll save AI for the moment. But I think what I was really missing a little bit was from the vendors was more of a really energizing sense of what the future of work can look like. And companies across industries are really struggling with talent and also trying to make sense of how automation can help. And, it's funny because, Vinnie, I think back to years ago, you and I had a debate around the future of automation. And I'm going to have to give you the credit there. You decisively won that debate because I felt like automation was going to encroach upon human work in really disruptive ways. And so far, that may happen in the future. We could talk about that. But so far, I think I hear from companies, whether it's manufacturers, healthcare, restaurants, I don't care what it is, they want as much automation and as much talent as they can get. Both. And so you're right. It hurts me to say it, but I'm going to give it to you.
Actually, John, I was only partially right. One of the reasons automation is gathering steam is COVID played a number on labor mindsets. COVID played a big number on, offices. So I didn't anticipate that. Thank you for giving me credit, but I didn't anticipate that. But let's focus on the sentiment of events that you just talked about, right? I'm hearing from vendors, hey, look, we need to uplift them. We can't have boring, or we cannot have overly serious presentations because people haven't traveled in a while. We need to make it light. So it sounds like you are hearing something different from customers. It's like,
well, a little bit. It's just that the real magic that vendors do is getting everyone in the same place. And that's a subtle magic, but it is magic. And seeing, not just seeing your friends, but seeing people in your industry talking shop with fellow CIOs or CHROs, you cannot put a price on that. And those conversations are uplifting, actually. They are energizing and they break down the isolation. Whereas having some dancer jump out of some cake or, setting up a DJ in the hallway, which drowns out the ability to network because the beats are throbbing in the background, it's a little overdone, which is not to say that, attendees do like that end of event celebration night. I'm not saying they don't, but I think vendors sometimes can be a little humbler and just say, look, we got everyone together. That was our job. Now let's set them free to have the kind of dialogue that they need to have. And when that happens, a lot of times magic happens. Now, there are things you can do to facilitate that dialogue, but unless you want to have an event, a discussion on creative event design, we're going to have to park it there for now.
Pete, how about you? You went to every HR and payroll show in town, and a few finance-oriented ones too.
Yeah,
payment ones. So,
yeah.
Summarize your event sentiment, if you will.
Yeah, my tour. Yeah, absolutely. It's been great, man. And look, it's always a privilege, I feel like, as analysts to get to go to these things. I mean, they're expensive. They're to John's point, they're a bit of a bit of pageantry mixed into a lot of different things. But I think at the core, they're a tremendous outlet for practitioners and leaders to get together and solve problems, right? And trade. And one of the key things I notice in working with the practitioners I work with in my research is it's almost like they're starving for community. Even when there are communities offered, there are other communities I think that are burgeoning out of that on LinkedIn and other places, and they get a lot of value out of the idea that I'm not the only one that has this issue, or can't be the first person to discover this problem. How can I go and get some help? And what better way to trade that information with other users of your platform or whatever. So I love all that about it. But yeah, look, I think I've been to maybe 8, or I was trying to count them up, maybe 8 or 10 of these in the last 12 or so weeks. And again, great stuff going on out there, right? I think all of the vendors are really trying to figure out how to solve a lot of those things that John was talking about. There's new challenges now coming into the market, right? More economic challenges, more concerns. I was just posting yesterday that I feel like in today's market, it's hard to find good customer experience. It really is, even with the best brands. And I think a lot of that is rooted deeply in talent, right? And just the value chain, if not supply chain. Sometimes I think you're operating a value chain, but I think all of that is plaguing everyone and I across industries. And I think each of these providers that I went to see, whether it was Ceridian or ADP or Workday, they're all really working, I think, to help with that challenge, but also that human augmentation piece as well. But what I worry about though is are we trading hey, let's chase the flashy light, and it happens to be generative AI? Are we taking our eye off the ball on the blocking and tackling, right? The baseline fundamentals that you absolutely have to get right.
Let's come back to that.
Yeah.
I want to know the sentiment on having been to 10, 12, 15 events like you. Well, I probably did the fewest of the 3 of you. I did a few customer-only events presented, so I don't count them as industry or vendor events. But
yeah,
what I really liked was doing fewer of them. I looked forward to them, right? If I had done what John did, I probably would have been burnt out. And the ones that I went to, either because I pushed them or because they have learned over the years, my God, they did a great job customizing the agenda. There's a nameless vendor who once had me go to 4 of their events in a year and basically just said, what the hell is, do what you need to. And I just felt so frustrated because I felt like, A, I was intruding on customer time, right? Vendor events are supposed to be for customers. And B, I really didn't know what I was doing, right? So I like that customized agenda format. And vendors, if you're listening, please keep doing more of that. Now, there are some other analysts who go, I don't want that. I don't want to be babysat. I want to go meet people whoever I can. So, all of us have slightly different perspectives, but doesn't sound like we had consensus on the event sentiment from the fall. I do think the attendance is going up, right, which is an encouraging sign. I think we all got tired of virtual events. So, that's one positive, and my positive is clearly the personalized agendas. Let's move on to the topic du jour in most of these events, which was AI, right? I mean, I actually posted an Instagram gallery of places where I saw AI visible at Dreamforce, right? They had AI pop out of everything they spelled. So, it's like hard to miss that AI is the energy, if you will, behind these events. John, what did you learn from this AI barrage? What did you find interesting? What did you find repetitive? Talk a little bit about the AI theme.
Okay, well, so obviously generative AI was the centerpiece, which is not the only form of AI, but just the form of AI that has taken over the popular imagination and had to be addressed by vendors. Unfortunately, the theme of the fall was kind of an overreach on that topic, to Pete's earlier point, where the vendors emphasized this generative AI so much at the expense of other really important topics, and that was a little unfortunate. It did have to be addressed. I also think vendors don't realize the extent to which their AI messaging is not differentiated from each other. So when they talk about, oh, we're protecting customer data privacy and blah, 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 they're really talking against consumer tech companies that have abused that, not their fellow enterprise vendors, all of whom have pretty coherent customer data privacy strategies. So that's just one example of how vendors are so proud of themselves for differentiation, but it's actually not that clear how they differentiate. And what I would say is that, as a classic example of this from last spring, I was at a show where there was a lot of generative AI talk on the keynote stage. And then later, I had a one-on-one with a customer that was doing some amazing stuff with much more mature shop floor robotics that were not actually featured in the keynote. And I said to the vendor, I said, what are you doing here? Like your audience, which is asset intensive industries, would have loved to hear this about these shop floor examples that are ready for prime time and making a true difference in the lives of these customers. And you're talking about hypothetical stuff that isn't released yet because none of the generative AI stuff is even shipping until some of it is starting to ship like this month and next month, but it wasn't even shipped through the course of the fall. So it really didn't make a lot of sense, I think, the way it was approached, but I understand why it had to be discussed, but they really needed to pull back a little bit. And to Pete's point, also, it wasn't just innovation that got obscured. It was also fundamental questions customers have, such as, can I get localized payroll in these countries? Or, how do I contend with the finance issues in this particular industry with new regulatory requirements? Those kind of discussions are really important to customers. And by and large, they had to seek those out on their own because they weren't getting it sort of served up for them.
How about you, Pete?
Yeah, perfectly said. And I think, you saw this a little bit at maybe a good example of this was at HR Tech, right? Every year at HR Tech, typically the themes will follow whatever the wave of the week is, the flavor of the year. And this year it was squarely generative AI. Last year I felt like it was largely DE&I. Before that it was employee experience, whatever the flavor is each time. And look, while everybody's doing it, air quotes, what was very interesting to me is to John's point, it was kind of ho-hum, right? Like, okay, well, how is yours any different than anybody else's? But what I noticed, what I walked away with was, in the HR Tech Pitch Fest, right? They do a pitch fest every year where they evaluate a certain number of the startups, right? The winning startup this year was a 401k transfer solution. And some of the runners up were things like Virgil HR, which is an HR compliance platform, gives you access to help with handbooks and things like that, right? So I think that clearly tells you, right? If you've ever transferred a 401k, you know exactly why this organization, I think they're called Manifest. You can check them out. You can see why that's a pain.
Talk about an analog process in a digital world.
Yeah, unbelievable, right? It's a horrible process. You got to get a check. You got to go through this whole thing. But look, the point I'm trying to get here is that it's not these home run moments that I think people are expecting to come in there and buy and look for. It's really what they're looking for are these blocking and tackling that is making life difficult. That shop floor example, right? The day-to-day minutia of doing, whatever you have to do as an employee should be a lot easier. And things like a 401k transfer, you would have been solved already. But here we are, 2023, and amongst all this Gen AI, this is the winner of the Pitch Fest. So there you go.
That's a great point. What I've seen in the events I've been to is kind of the use cases galore, right? So if you ask most of the vendors we follow, they'll say their killer app is their HR, generative AI, or it's finance or procurement. It tends to be back office. But they'll say, hey, to John's point, our data is sanitized, it's book of record quality, and therefore we deserve a premium. Unlike ChatGPT, which goes after the wild west of the consumer web, ours is sanitized data, right? So that's their broad angle to their AI. When you talk to hyperscalers, it's a case of, we think the killer app is going to be developer productivity, DevOps productivity, right? The next generation, beyond generative AI into autonomous agents and all that, that's their excitement. If you talk to consulting firms, they're like, oh my God, we have got so much content over the years. Can't wait to apply ChatGPT type LLMs to our content. And then you step back. I had this interesting conversation with executives from one of the vendors, and I said, guys, you're so proud of your stuff, and you should be. But let me look at it from a CEO or board level perspective. You guys are coming in with your back office use cases. I'm hearing CRM ones. I'm hearing tons of operational ones, robotics or I was with some railroad executives. There's so much data, trackside data for their, heat and sound sensors that track. They can tell, hey, this ball bearing in this wheel is likely to fail, right? There's a lot of operational data that is waiting to be mined and used and all that. And I go, I would be a little humble and just look at it from a CEO's perspective and say, where does my use case in terms of value show up? It's actually usually pretty low because, to them, customer-centric, products and IP-centric data is, operational data is far more important from their perspective. So I think the industry will get a wake-up call and say, we have too many HR, too many financial, too many basic administrative use cases that are coming out and not enough, of the operational stuff. Now, one thing I've noticed is I told somebody recently, I said, the killer app to me from Gen I is going to be previous versions of AI, right? I'm seeing some really fascinating demand forecasting applications that are now taking new streams of data that weren't available 5 years ago.
Yeah.
People have been using, obviously, point of sale data, but weather data is available, customer sentiment data is available, gas price data is available, because in some cases, if somebody comes to your Costco, goes to your pump, they're likely to come in and that'll affect demand for everything in the store, right? So there's some really interesting previous gen applications that are starting to come out, which actually I'm more excited about. I mean, Gen AI is interesting. It's more interesting in document-oriented industries and labor-intensive industries, but asset-intensive industries probably won't have as much of an impact. For them, unplanned downtime is the biggest thing. If you can help avoid, they'll pay a lot of money for.
Yeah.
Documentation, it's nice. I mean, clearly it helps their maintenance workers and all that, but not quite as big bang.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on AI, John? You're itching to jump in.
Well, yeah, because I think you nailed it on the pricing thing. A lot of vendors aren't handling the pricing issues around generative AI very well. And unfortunately, I think what they're doing is they're posturing for Wall Street, because Wall Street loves hearing about these premiums that they're about to charge and how that's going to impact revenues. But from a customer standpoint, the mistake that's being made is that there's low-hanging fruit, if you can accept that crappy phrase, in generative AI in certain areas. So for example, like in job descriptions in HR, it's an obvious example. It's something it is going to help customers like that. Service bots in customer service use cases, service assistants, things like that. That's an obvious use case. All kinds of digital assistants can probably help in certain ways. But the problem is that when you go beyond that, a lot of the more interesting use cases are going to involve some kind of co-innovation scenario that is actually going to involve the customer's own data. And so now you're saying, okay, I'm going to co-innovate with you with my ideas and my own data, and you're going to charge me a premium for the trouble, even though we haven't proven ROI yet. That doesn't make any sense. And so that's the problem right now with this whole discussion, is that customers are coming to these shows. They want to make the most out of their existing investment. They don't want to be told, oh, now you're going to have to pay more for unproven use cases that might help your ROI in some distant future. That's just not the mood of customers right now in the current macroeconomic headwinds environment that we live in. So some stuff's going to have to get resolved before we hit the event schedule this spring.
Yeah, a couple of interesting use cases. What I told one vendor was, that's interesting. I like it, but why don't you quantify how many a typical customer, how many instances, right? And then tell me how much you're going to charge, because then I can look at the value versus the cost. They just throw the use case out without the quantity, the quantification of, you're going to benefit from 1 million of these or 500,000 of job descriptions and so on. So I think vendors still need to do some work on looking at the enterprise cost and value equation.
Yep.
Pete, you had an interesting point about a lot of attention is going to the shiny new object, but there's a lot of blocking and tackling still to be done.
Oh, yeah.
My moniker is Vinnie Vertical. I'm always pushing vendors for operational applications. I'm increasingly pushing them for how many countries do you service? 15 out of 207 around the world, right? Where are the geographic extensions and so on, right? What are you guys seeing in that? I didn't hear much about those extensions in the events I've been to. Clearly,
Yeah.
I asked to see some of the verticals, but I didn't hear much about geographies. I didn't hear much about even the blocking and tackling.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been pressing many of the vendors on this, especially the HCMs. I think they have the biggest responsibility, right? They're covering the widest swath of customers. They're offering the widest range of HR towers to support. And I think that blocking and tackling, that fundamental stuff, right? The fundamental HR stuff is still hard. There's still a tremendous amount of opportunity in the back office to your point, right? Forget generative, right? There's other things we still haven't, solved for HR and finance that should have already been solved. And many are, some of that's self-inflicted. Some of that is just, various different dynamics. But look, I think that this blocking and tackling element of HR has got to be priority, right? I wrote about this around Workday. I said, look, it's great that you've done a fantastic job, getting these HCM attractors, right? They've adopted their HCM all the way for Workday, but you're struggling to necessarily equal that when it comes to finance. And I said, one of the key things in my write-up is payroll is going to be a robust payroll capability with multi-country localization is going to be absolutely critical to getting finance leaders to say, CFOs to say, yeah, I can go all in on Workday, right? If it's already on HR and I can trust payroll, I think that's the bridge between, HR and finance, particularly as it pushes, say, beyond borders. And I think that's going to remain the case for many of these platforms, right? They're going to have to make sure that the benefits and payroll and the core pieces and parts of HR remain very robust and very future forward and augmented before trying to do these fantastic talent things they want to do, because we've got to make sure the data is there. We got to make sure the processes flow, because if you break the other stuff underlying, right, you don't pay people right, you don't get their benefits right, they're not going to, it's not going to matter what talent investments you make.
What's interesting is you mentioned HR from a global perspective. Well,
Yeah.
clearly, payroll and all that benefits very important. But I've talked to several multinationals in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
For different reasons, right? They've moved out of certain countries because inflation is out of control, like Argentina. They've been forced to move out of Russia. They've been strategically saying China +1 from a supply chain perspective, right? So they're looking for, okay, this is a vacuum I need to fill. Where do I move? I may move to Vietnam. I may move to Cambodia or whatever, right? Can you support me, right? So I'm hearing from multinationals that is clearly important. The second thing I'm seeing is there are some emerging economies that are just growing as fast as we are.
Yeah.
A lot of even smaller companies are saying, I need capabilities in those markets, right? So it's not just HR. There is a lot of operational, financial, and other capabilities also that people need on a global
talent, right? Just finding talent. You got to get outside your borders if you want to get the best. And you're right. There's there's places in Africa where there's phenomenal talent, but you've got to get that. You got to be able to connect to them. And and it's not a big company problem anymore. Smaller and smaller companies are finding themselves in locations they never expected.
I was talking to a VC who invests in Africa, and he said, the best thing the hyperscalers have done is made DevOps around the world. You can go to Kenya, you can go to South Africa, you can go to Dubai, and the talent you find there, you go, oh my God, this could be in Boston or Silicon Valley, right? So
totally.
So the world has in some ways become flat, if you will. John, what are you seeing in terms of the boring stuff of what software vendors should be doing?
Well, I think one of the reasons you're right about the industry and the localization stuff is that that's hard work. But I would say that one thing that sometimes I think you and I differ on, Vinny, is that I think a key thing vendors need to do here is to open up their platforms for industry partners to build next generation applications that can solve some of these problems. You often, and when I hear you pressing vendors, you want them to build a lot of that stuff themselves, whereas I want them to build a platform that enables partners in different markets to use their expertise and imagination to build. Now, what the vendor has to do is to make that possible by providing all the localized stuff around, whether it's payroll or compliance related stuff that smaller firms struggle with. But as far as imagination and creativity applied to industry, that's where industry experts with app building skills are invaluable. And I met with some really interesting AI startups along the way that are doing some of that, including at some of these HR shows, And, one of them was like tackling some hourly contractor problems and this kind of like new gig economy workplace that's coming out that vendors aren't really tackling as well as they are. And they're doing it in an AI context with co-pilots and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to writing up this use case. Haven't had a chance yet. I've got a friggin' backlog of content. But the point is, if you build your platform properly and insert enough guardrails and adult supervision to make sure people aren't going rogue, I think engaging industry experts on your platform is a key way to solve that, because you can't do it all yourself. So anyway, you and I probably continue to disagree about that, but that's how I feel.
The reason, John, I've come to that position where I push vendors is they've used the excuse of the platform since Salesforce introduced Force.com. The reality is, if you want a partner to build it, you're saying, I'm not willing to invest $1 billion in this market, you do it, right? And startups can't do that. Startups can build a feature or two. The big integrators are going to say, if I'm going to invest that much money, I better, why should I want
Well, I don't know. I don't agree with that though. I've seen startups build entire verticals on platforms. I'm going to challenge you on that. But I do think that vendors have to do a lot of the heavy lifting that you're describing as far as creating environments of compliance and localized regulation adherence that smaller companies can't look after all of that stuff. Vendors are really good at that. And I'm not saying that vendors also shouldn't verticalize their strategies. I mean, one of the encouraging things I'm seeing on the so-called CX side of the enterprise is a lot more discussion about industries than ever before.
Oh yes,
but vendors have to pick their industries and be clear about that from a roadmap perspective. But if you're not covering a particular industry or a particular micro vertical in industry, I just don't see what's wrong with letting an energized, smart partner build out some of that.
Absolutely. I give a lot of vendors, startups, an opportunity to present in my analyst camp. Don't get me wrong. I just find that is a throwaway excuse. Partners will build it. And 10 years later, I'm like, where is it? Right. Yeah. So I've become a little bit of a cynical, I build a platform, somebody else, I'll build it, they'll come. It doesn't.
I don't see very many good platforms being built, Vinnie. So that's where I would differ on you.
Okay.
Well, they might claim they have a platform, but I think a lot of it is bullshit. How many vendors have a really thriving apps ecosystem around their platform? I think you think count it on one hand.
They don't. To my point, then. Thank you. So let's talk about economics here. One of the things that I've seen probably a little bit more from SAP is, they're pushing their on-premise ECC customer base to move. Deadlines approaching in 4 years. They've launched Rise and Grow, a couple of, packaged hyperscaler and next-gen product and integration services and all that. And they become more and more aggressive about that, right? Because it's gathering momentum, or at least if they're not being aggressive, just the marketplace is talking about it more. And then with AI, I don't know if it's to please Wall Street or what. So I have 3 different views on AI-based pricing. I have seen Wall Street analysts specifically goad CEOs in earnings calls and say, NVIDIA GPUs are going to be so expensive, you may not even get them. You better make sure you charge a premium for your AI, right? So it's like cost-driven pressures from their perspective. I've heard vendors go, I deserve a premium because I got sanitized book of record, high quality data, right? I've seen hyperscalers come up with completely different value propositions, but they're all suggesting they deserve a premium. I keep coming back to guys, show me the value, then we can compare your price and we negotiate some reasonable number. It may deserve a premium, in some cases it won't, right? So let's talk about economics a little bit more. John, am I just more sensitive to the fact that we're seeing more pricing discussions come out than in the last couple of years?
No, not at all. I mean, look, it's a tough economic environment. Wall Street's been hitting firms pretty hard. And if you can say that you can charge a premium for AI, Wall Street seems to like that. But I've always been of the camp that ultimately your greatest weapon with Wall Street is a slew of incredibly happy customers that are getting tremendous ROI and value out of your products, to your point. And I think you have to find a way to communicate a little bit more to Wall Street instead of serving up on a platter that you're going to charge people a premium for stuff that isn't proven yet. So I think it's a really important conversation. And I do think the good news is that a lot of vendors are looking hard at various options for AI pricing. The unavoidable part is that these systems are expensive to run, and so it's not easy to figure out how to make all that work from a balance profit and loss perspective. But I do think we're going to see more creative approaches, and we've started to see that with various, whether it's Zoom or Azure, or there's consumption-based ideas coming out through Box. There's a lot of things that are going to shake out here, but I would agree. I've been frustrated with exactly what you described this entire event season.
Pete, have you had much exposure to economics in the
Not on that regard, no, because with HR, I think it's largely a lot of these solutions, it's largely sort of baked into the product.
But you've been to a few payment, you've been to a couple of payment events.
Yeah.
Is it coming up there? Because they seem much more financially savvy, right?
Yeah, well, I think that, yeah, I just went to Money 2020, and I think the focus there was clearly around, it wasn't even, the AI conversation really didn't come up. It was more around just and I would say maybe some of that is less mature for them, but I think it was more around just the speed of money movement, right? The access of money movement and the inclusion of modern money movement and digital solutions, which I think from my world, right, being in the HR world, that lends itself to helping people get access to money in a time when it's getting harder and harder. Money's getting more expensive, right? If you will, from a lending perspective. And so I thought what was interesting was some of the ways in which organizations are really starting to look at the concerns around the de-dollarization, right, of the US dollar, and the fact that the BRICS are getting off of that. So there was a lot of angst around that. I think that more of the, is the US sort of tumbling somewhat as an economy, and what does that mean? There's a lot of prognostication around that, but I think fundamentally what I came away with was a very positive tone around what fintech is going to be able to do for folks around the world, right, of all levels of access, and just open up access to people that probably don't maybe get that access today in a different way. So I think that was the theme of what I was seeing.
I'll need to bring you back for a separate episode. Just the D's that are going around the world. The world is deglobalizing, Germany is deindustrializing, and the world is de-dollarizing, right? I tend to be a little more of a long-term view on that. My de-dollarization is somebody needs to step up. Yes, the US is wasteful. My God, what we've done in the last few years, spending money like that we never had. It's just crazy, right? But I tell Chinese, I tell Indians, I go, do three things and you guys can take over the world. One is open up the trade. We are the biggest trading partner for most of the world. Step up. All you guys want to do is export.
Yep.
You don't want to import. You don't want to buy from others. Once you start stepping up, maybe you could replace the US. Second, and this is a sensitive topic, I go, we let, one way or the other, we let 5 to 10 million immigrants a year. How about you? Oh, we're already overpopulated. Well, then somebody needs to step up. Maybe get somebody in your group to step up. Till that happens, don't brag. And third, this is probably the most difficult one for them to do.
Yep.
I go, for the last 100 years, the US Navy has provided basically for free for free trade around the world. We can withdraw. Somebody needs to take over, or else you'll have piracy all over the world.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then global trade will just completely evaporate. So before you talk about, it's fine to talk about all the de-dollarization. The world isn't ready for it. My view, anyways.
Yeah, I would agree.
Let's
suddenly I feel like I'm on CNN all of a sudden. This is really,
right?
really crazy. CNN never invites me onto their shows.
John, I want you to go back and tell me I was right again. So let's talk about automation.
A rare concession.
Let's talk about automation. What triggered that comment?
Well, just how many customers that I've spoken with that are really enthusiastic about automating various processes, and it's something that began during the pandemic, obviously, because people got a crash course in where their weaknesses in their workflows are and where their paper-based processes are. But you're hearing more and more for customers who have gotten rid of paper in their processes and stuff like that. And I do think there deserves to be more discussion about what true automation maturity looks like and how do you evolve, because some of the stuff we're hitting on now is really just probably one level up from robotics process automation, and it's still fairly basic. But the fact of the matter is it does reduce pain points for customers and it helps them do more with less. And I just did a Gen I interview yesterday with an insurance company that has been able to automate a fair amount of their basic level queries using a more sophisticated bot. And that was a really cool story. And so you try to understand, like, what are the keys to that? And of course, it's not easy, right? Because you have to have a good data platform if you're going to automate things, because you have to have intelligent information going into a system like that if it's going to take work off of humans. But I think in general, across industries, there's a real understanding that, like, the more high value work I can do, the better off I'm going to be and the better off my company's going to be. And that's ultimately what people want to get to, where maybe right now they're still doing 60 or 70 or 80% administrivia, but they'd like to get that down to 40, 30, or 20. And you could tackle that from a finance or HR or manufacturing perspective. I don't care what it is. There's some higher value activity you could be doing, whether it's crunching numbers or serving customers or resolving more complex problems. And that really energizes companies to figure out how to do that. Exactly how you do that is kind of up for grabs, and a lot of different vendors are trying to get in on that action, from pure play automation vendors to classic ERP vendors to pretty much everyone else. So,
John, one thing you mentioned the conversation 2 years ago, that was when I wrote the book Silicon Collar, that looked at automation in different industries. And what I still don't see, the first 4 chapters of the book looked at automation in 50 different industries, everything from winemaking to advertising to white collar and blue collar and trade industries, right? To energy drilling, to exoskeletons in the military. We looked at all kinds of automations, autonomous vehicles in different industries. I still see too much of a focus on white collar automation. I'm not seeing the convergence yet. What I'd like to see is the Bureau of Labor Statistics has 900 occupations it tracks. And if you look at them, they have skills. Need vision, need limb mobility, need whatever, right? And I'd like to see the convergence of robotics and AI and drones and computer vision and all that. Companies still have to buy a lot of different things. You go to an Amazon distribution center and there are conveyor belts, there are Kiva robots, there's a whole bunch of cameras, a whole bunch of sensors and all that. It's all integration that Amazon's done itself. No integrators emerged to say, hey, I will deliver to you a warehouse bot and computer vision and relevant AI and so on. And no software vendor clearly is doing that, because they only focus on the software side of things. So that to me is still the next big leap we need to make as an industry. Pete, did you hear much about automation in the HR events you went to?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And good news, Vin. I just recently interviewed a VP of, he was sort of on the admin side, the back office side of the organization at Sbarro. And he was talking about how they're using robots to actually knead dough and create the pizza dough. So there is some, there is some experimentation going on in that world. But yeah, absolutely. I think where we're at in HR is squarely moving from automation to augmentation. That's really the theme of what you're hearing with the generative and just AI in general, machine learning, of course. And look, much of that is very conversational, inquiry based right now. And I think you'll see that getting more and more of the, and it is, right? It's already infusing underneath the hood on data and surfacing insights and all of that, but we need more, right? There, as we talked about, the back office still is ripe for opportunity. There's only some firms that have invested in RPA. Most of them are just relying on whatever's in their system for their automation. So I think there's still a lot we can do there, and a lot we can do to elevate, because look, here's a big key theme I think we saw across everything, HR related anyway, is the frontline manager, right? I mean, more than ever, they're being asked to do a lot more than just their job every day. And that is coming in and running some process and managing the people that do that. They're really being asked to take on the care and feeding of those people, right? Worry about their engagement, worry about their wellness. And so that's where I think the augmentation for folks like that are going to be really critical, but also the insights, giving them the insights to be able to be good leaders and make good decisions. Now, they need certainly some leadership training, but fundamentally give them at least the data and the insights to make positive decisions for their workforce. So a lot of emphasis on the frontline manager, a lot of emphasis on the back office practitioner, but also, of course, the employee experience, right? They'll be hammering at that forever. But yeah, 100%.
Final thoughts, John.
Well, I mean, these are welcome discussions. I mean, these kind of events prove the
I
importance.
especially like when you're complimentary to me.
Yeah. Hey, it happens. I also disagree with you.
Once
So I
every
think
5 years.
I think we had a good sampling of both sides of that today for our viewers. I think they got a feeling for what it's like putting you and I together in situations. So that's cool. But yeah, I mean, to me, these are the really valuable conversations like we have today, where we step back from the flurry of events and try to make sense of what we've learned. And that's a really important part of this exercise. Before we dive headlong into the spring events, we need to get a better reckoning on exactly what we missed, what we got right, and what we need to do, because ultimately we all have to try to serve customers better and deliver more successful projects. That's the name of the game. And honestly, we still have a long way to go. And so I think these discussions are a great starting point for that. And hopefully we can do more of the same. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pete, final thoughts?
No, nothing really big. I think we hit on a lot of great things. It was really privileged just to be here with you guys. So maybe we should do this again sometime. I had a great time.
You know, Pete, you are such a nice guy. You're always saying it's an honor, it's a privilege, and all that.
Yeah,
My favorite sales line has become, I used to think it was hokey, but I love salespeople who start any presentation or conversation with, "Thank you for being a customer."
Yeah.
It is. I have to think, they say it enough times in a day that it's part of their muscle memory now, which is not a bad thing, right? So
Yeah.
thank you for you're always saying it's an honor. It is an honor, all of us, for us to get together and,
100%.
beat up on vendors every once in a while and yet be complimentary of them. So,
Yes, absolutely. Well, appreciate you guys.
thank you.